You must make a difference between a relationship and a transaction. In order for people to benefit from help, there first must be redemption. So what our groups do is when they confront a person whose poverty is related to lack of morality or character, the first thing they do is witness to that person by modeling the kind of values that person needs to adopt. And as a consequence, redemption occurs in that person. And once redemption occurs, then a transaction can help. These young men said, no one ever asked us to be peaceful. The biggest barrier I face isn't racial, it's class. We just won't recognize that untutored does not mean unwise.
What if some forms of charity actually do harm? Not intentionally, but because they solve the wrong problem. In this conversation with Dr. Bob Woodson, we take a hard look at something most people avoid: how helping, when done the wrong way, can make things worse. Let's begin. Dr. Woodson, I had the pleasure of hearing you speak in Florida just a few weeks ago. And then, I told you a little bit about this podcast and you said, sure, you'd be happy to be a guest. Thank you for joining us today on You Are What You Give.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Delighted.
Well, thank you for being delighted, because I feel like you have so much to offer. 65 years in the civil rights movement. What was the civil rights movement back then, and how does it compare with today? I'm not asking for a history lesson. Instead, how would you compare perhaps the fundamentals of the civil rights movement back then with what's going on today?
Well, first of all, the civil rights movement was a moral movement. It was really intended to challenge America's birth defect of slavery and Jim Crow and the moral, immoral underpinnings of it. And so, therefore, we organize around that as an organizing principle. And the strategy was to appeal to America's conscience and to live up to its creed and the statements in our founding documents. We use those to say, to deliver on what you promised. Mm-hmm. And so that was the organizing. And also the strategy was nonviolent. Dr. King ensured that we were nonviolent. And then it was activism. It was when challenging unjust laws, the bus boycotts, and other strategies again. But it also meant a personal responsibility. We were careful about how we dressed. No one could be in the line of march who was intoxicated. There were moral standards for those who participated. You couldn't engage in violent resistance. And so these were the rules that we followed. And as a consequence, it really challenged the conscience of America to the point where Bill Connors, and when he told his police officers and firemen to fire on the groups, they refused. And you could just see the change. And so it culminated in, of course, the March on Washington. And then the goal was completed when we signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. But we realized, even though the laws had passed, there was very little compliance. There was still resistance. And so we had to then demonstrate to ensure that the laws would be followed. And so we were able to again, it was a moral movement. Even though it was a moral movement, there were always a quality debate within the movement. Mm-hmm. We called the Atlanta group, Thurgood Marshall and Dr. King and others. They thought the approach forward should be legal challenges. But when the students at Greensboro decided that the pace was too slow and they had to sit in at Woolworth's, Dr. King was sent to the students to try to discourage them from engaging in civil disobedience. But the students said, either lead, follow, or get out of the way. And Dr. King wisely chose to lead. But there was always tension. And then he went into Birmingham, and neither the civil rights leaders or the pastors came to his support. It was the young people who poured out and supported him. And as a consequence, the movement moved forward, but with the students. So there was a splintering of the movement, but all with one goal in mind, and that is to achieve justice, to compel America to live up to its promise as is defined in its founding documents.
So, Dr. Woodson, you have this, like you said, the splintering of the movement. There's a different pace, but there's this unifying set of principles, and there's this decorum that people are intrinsically expected to maintain that, so that there's a mutual respect even with antagonists who are trying to prevent, perhaps systematically, the movement from succeeding. Where are you in all of this?
Well, again, I was leading demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Barrett Rustin. It's about a city 30 miles west of Philadelphia. And Barrett Rustin, I met Dr. King one time because people don't realize that Barrett Rustin and the national leaders would come through, and it would attract the press. And then those of us who were local leaders had a platform to express our protest. And that's how it worked. And so, but I was solid with the civil rights movement, but I departed from them on two major issues, and I saw the change coming. After we had achieved the laws, voting rights, and the Civil Rights Act, I think it was Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the opportunity to eat in a restaurant of your choosing or live in a neighborhood if you don't have the means to exercise that right? So I understood that. And the other issue that I parted company with on the issue of forced busing for integration. I was against forced busing. I believe, and I argued this on Meet the Press in challenge and debating Jesse Jackson and Johnny Cochran and others. And I said that the opposite of segregation is desegregation. It is not integration.
Interesting.
Because if you embrace integration as the goal, I remember being in a debate at, I think it was the New York Bar Association, with a black Harvard lawyer, Julius Chambers, head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And midway through that debate, I said, Julius, we have two propositions. We have situation A, there's a school that is all black, but there's a presence of educational excellence. School B is integrated, but there's diminished excellence. Where should we send our children? He said, to school B. I said, well, then there's no debate. I believe that we should pursue excellence, and then the byproduct will be integration. And so, but I lost that fight, and they said, well, Bob, your position is consistent with the Klan and the John Birch Society.
Wow.
And I said, well, if I like classical music and Hitler does, am I supposed to not like classical music? You don't take your position based upon who agrees or disagrees. And so I realized when I left the movement, there's one other issue that I think is important. It's more class. That what the civil rights movement did, it used the demographics of low-income blacks to make a case for resources in the poverty programs. And when those government funds came, they did not go to the poor. They went to those who served the poor. And I saw that there was a bait and switch. Like 70% of the $22 trillion we spent over a 50-year period went not to the poor, but to those who served the poor. And many of the civil rights leaders left and began to enter electoral politics and became the mayors of these cities that was dispensing these poverty monies. So we created a commodity out of low-income blacks, where the question when these resources came was not which problems can we solve, but which problems are fundable.
Right. That's a big challenge, even in places where, it's a challenge all over. Whenever you try to solve a problem with money, you're creating perhaps an opportunity for people to misuse the system. And I'm not here to pass judgment. You can pass judgment. That's not my role. My role is simply to better understand what would be a better system. What do you, Dr. Woodson, advocate for as opposed to, because again, poverty is a problem that people try to solve, right? Is poverty a solvable issue? That's a fair principle question, but in practice, you're a practitioner, right? What
Yes.
can be done better to serve or support communities that are otherwise disadvantaged?
Well, first of all, it's important not to generalize about the poor. Not everybody is poor for the same reason. There are four categories of poor people. Category one are people just broke. There's a death of a significant other, or a factory moves out of the town, but their values and characters intact. And so they use help as a ambulance service, not as a whole transportation system.
Okay.
And again, category two are people whose characters intact, but their perverse incentives built into aid programs, so that if they take a job or then they'll lose benefits. So if we take the perverse incentives out, they'll be okay. Three are people who are mentally or physically disabled, and we've got to find out a way to care for them. But the category four is the one that concerns most of us, because that's where the problems in society of violence and misbehavior. These are people who are poor because of the chances that they take and the choices that they make. Theirs is a value crisis. To give money to that latter group, you will be injuring them with the helping hand. That's toxic support. And so the way you help them, the groups that the Woodson Center supports specialize in addressing people in category four, because you must make a difference between a relationship and a transaction. In order for people in category four to benefit from help, there first must be redemption. And once there is, and so what our groups do is they come in when they confront a person whose poverty is related to their lack of morality or character, the first thing they do is witness to that person by modeling the kind of values that person needs to adopt. And as a consequence, redemption occurs in that person. And once redemption occurs, then a transaction can help that person.
You're honing in on something here with the work of the Woodson Center, which seems to be, of the four categories, the hardest category to tackle.
Absolutely.
You're going to the heart of who a person is. You're speaking about redemption. I'm going to need you to define that for us. What is that redemption, and how can somebody else help somebody find that redemption?
Okay. I think it was Pastor Swindell said, 10% of who we are is external. Oppression, racism. 90% of who we are is our attitude about the 10%.
Right.
We decide that someone else said that the victimizer might have knocked you down, but the victim has to get up. Well, one of our young men or women who are in the transformation business confronts a violent young man. He says to him, "I've been where you are." First of all, there's moral authority. The young person looks at that person and knows of their reputation. And so their witness is, they were once a predator, now they are ambassador of peace. So that sparks curiosity on the part of the person.
Okay.
How did you get from where you were? He said, I'm not going to tell you, but I can show you. And this is where the relationship gets developed. Come walk with me.
The modeling.
Here is my phone number. Come to my house. I want you to come and walk with me. And so these young men began to, and so values are not necessarily taught, they are caught. How do you raise your children? You model the values you want your children to follow. You don't give them a handbook on how to be a child.
Right. There's no manual for that.
There's no manual for that. But you put them in a situation. So what our groups do to change and promote redemption is witness with that person, walk with them, help them, take them to dinner. When you are in crisis or you have a call me, let me walk with you. And so there, as a consequence of establishing a relationship, they are able to, in a short period of time, entice people into changing. And once that happens, I don't really understand it, but I know it when I see it.
Can you give us an example, Dr. Woodson, of when you've seen?
Yes, there's a young lady. I was thinking of a story in Washington, D.C. There was an area 25 years ago called Benning Terrace. It was 53 murders in a 5 square block area in 2 years because of these warring factions. I have been working with 5 men who were ex-offenders who come to God. And I said to them, you have the trust of people on the streets and officials, but no one can measure your effectiveness. You need to concentrate in one neighborhood. And in this area of Benning Terrace, a 12-year-old was beaten to death, and it embarrassed the city, and it was national headlines. And I said, God has made the choice for you. Go in that neighborhood, find out who the warring factions are, and bring them to my office downtown. Well, they did what the police couldn't do, and I just found there were 8 young men on either side, the Avenue and the Circle gangs. One of them worked for an auto dealership, and they borrowed 2 15-passenger vans, and they brought them to my office. I had some experience in gang intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put the leaders on the phone with 2 of my guys in Hartford and Los Angeles who had experience in gang mediation. And so they guided my guys. When they came into my office, we had a big table, we had a meal. This is a part of it. Long story short, these young men said, no one ever asked us to be peaceful. In other words, no one with authority. As a consequence, we had 2 sessions, and these young men never knew why the conflict, how it started. But I said, are you happy with your life? The people are afraid of you, not respecting you. And they said, no. They said, if we give you an opportunity to change, would you take it? They said, yes. They shook hands, and we had a national press conference. The housing authority director was there. He gave them jobs as to repair the very community that they tore up. So they became part of the housing authority. Through the leader of the avenue became the foreman, the leader of the circle, and they switched. And it was front page news. These young men were removing graffiti. They removed more graffiti in 6 months than the housing authority staff did in 2 years.
Right.
And people who used to run from them ran to them now. And so we made them heroes, and they called me always on the last minute and said, we want to give a picnic for the moms of Benning Terrace. And so we did. And as a consequence, these young men who were predators became ambassadors of peace, and they became big brothers and father figures. And this is a point of giving. I said to them, you owe us for what we've done for you, but we don't want you to repay. We want you to know you have to give back for what has been given to you. What are you passionate about? They said they're passionate about being coaches. So we made them coaches. 100 kids showed up wanting to be on the teams. So I said, I was at a business meeting in Fairfax County, and I got a call. And they said, Bob, it's been 3 months now. They've earned it. We're ready for uniforms. So I collected $15,000 in the room for uniforms for the kids. But I told the people giving it to me, you will not be acknowledged for this because the uniforms will be given by the coaches to them. It's also important to know how you give. Long story short, they had 3 football teams. The whole community changed from being the most violent to the most peaceful. We didn't have a gang murder for 12 years.
Wow. That's astonishing. From
And we
53 murders in
exported
2
that
years
model
to
to,
none over 12 years.
yes. And it was, but again, I didn't see any scholars, conservative or liberal scholars, rushing in to do evaluations. There was no rush to kind of acknowledge that we did get some funding. We were able to export it to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Dallas, Texas, with the same results.
Wow.
And
So
so,
yeah, the proof is in the pudding, obviously. I think it's fascinating that these personalities, when you ask them what they wanted to do, first, they had never been invited to be peaceful before, and the invitation was made. And so they were on board, which sounds perhaps, I don't know, simple and surprising at the same time. But I'm fascinated by this leadership element. You found people who were leading gangs and became coaches, right? They wanted to have a leadership role, but the framing was fundamentally different. And that trickled down to the entire community. Do you want to join the gang or do you want to join the sports team? And you're saying that this is something that can be replicated in other areas as well?
we've done it. I can show you, I can send you videotapes. And my frustration is that it was not embraced as a national model.
And to what do you attribute that?
Let me give you an example of how it goes down.
Please.
These are like middle schoolers. I mean, they live in this worst public housing. The coaches, this is where the innovation comes from. The coaches said the kids behave themselves when they're with us, but not when they're with their mothers or their teachers.
Okay, yeah.
So the answer is every Friday night, they have to turn in a letter, a behavioral letter signed by their teacher and their mother, or they couldn't practice on Saturday.
Oh, wow.
So the mothers and the teachers said the only control I have over my son is these behavioral cards.
Amazing.
And so
And the kids are so committed to playing on Saturday that they're willing to get along with their moms, which is easier said than done. Teenagers. I mean, come on. And they're willing to be on their best behavior over the course of the week just so that they can play and be part of that. I mean, that says something about wanting to be part of something bigger than yourself.
it really is. But again, it has to come from a legitimate authority, someone with moral authority and social trust.
Right.
And that's very important because I remember watching, and 2 of the kids started to fight. So the coaches said, well, you all will hold hands and walk around in front of everybody so they can laugh at you. The kids said, well, I'm not going to do it. He said, go home then. They're not going to go home. They will only accept discipline from people that have that authority. And it exists all over the country. If you have a school, for instance, of 1,000 kids, those 1,000 kids are controlled by 10%. And they're that 10%. So you're talking about reaching sometimes just 10 boys. And once you change them, they're like antibodies.
Right.
The best way to cure the human body is to strengthen its own immune system.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Woodson, you identify the leaders, and the case for living a better life is so compelling that you find the way to their hearts through modeling and walking them through a process so that they're the antibodies that can help cure an entire community.
Absolutely.
And yet you're saying that this is something that's really currently only working because places like the Woodson Center are promoting it. It's not something that's institutionalized on a government level. Is there something here that's part of the secret sauce that maybe government just can't do? Or is the government maybe just turning a blind eye or overlooking an opportunity?
Where is the big investment from the private sector? Liberals, of course, invest in like $100 million in Harvard to study slavery, the history of how many Harvard founders owned slaves. There's $100 million spent on that. Boston University, Abraham Kendi, is spending $50 million on the study of racism. Liberals gave Black Lives Matter $100 million. That's just 3 organizations, $250,000. So what do conservatives spend on? Think tanks. white papers, elections. There's no counter, no investment in some of these. Even George Soros spends on local issues, local. Conservatives are absent, and this is one of my biggest complaint. There's a lot of private dollars around, but they're not in, they're invested. In other words, it's in what I'm trying to say to conservatives. If you want to defend the founding values of this nation, you're not going to do it by just electing people to office or writing white papers and then complaining about it on Fox News. You have to support the people whose actions and behavior embody those values. So if you want to um, persuade people that the values of this nation are critical to our future, then you should be able to point to people's what I provide models so people can point to and say those values are fundamental to the restoration of this person's personal redemption and also the transformation of a whole community.
Dr. Woodson, I have a question. Obviously, you've been through this 65 years of history on the front lines of civil rights is, significant. And you've seen the ins and the outs and everything from Dr. King, who you met, and all the people along the way who have had, the ups and the downs, the challenges, the splintering, all the different ways you've been able to discern what really does work. And I want to be naive, intentionally naive for a second. The basically the conversation between the two sides of the aisle, the conservatives and the liberals and the different splinterings of those movements, we're not going to do a political analysis right now, but I would like to think that wherever you are on the aisle, what you've just described is something. I'm not speaking about the extremists and the fringe. I'm talking about the 98, 99% of Americans who actually share these very basic values, transforming a community, preventing murders by the tens of murders. I mean, this is pretty elementary stuff. Do you find that when you actually do get an opportunity to speak with somebody, or, those hearing this podcast, for example, that maybe you can kind of peel back the layers of political affiliations and red and blue and just have a real conversation, and somebody says, you know what, I get it, I'm with you, I am going to make a contribution?
We're reaching that, part of what the paradigm that we have followed is in my book, The Triumphs of Joseph. The Triumphs of Joseph is central to what the Woodson Center does. Here is a man who was betrayed by his family, sold into slavery. I don't have to tell you that. But Joseph never succumbed to bitterness. And nor did he ever lose his faith in his God, even though it looks like God has turned his back on it for so long. And as a consequence, there are two types of Josephs. If you say that 70% of families in these low-income Black neighborhoods are raising children that are dysfunctional, it means 30% are not. We go into the 30% of the households that are raising children that are not dropping out of school or in jail and drug. Those are the Josephs, in poverty but not of poverty. The second type of Josephs, those who were prostitutes and predators, but through God's grace have become redeemed. And therefore they can witness to people that just because they started life on the other side, transformation, redemption is available to them. These are the two types of Josephs that the Woodson Center serves. What we recruit is pharaohs. A good pharaoh is somebody with wealth and power, but is able to dream bad dreams in good times and look over the horizon and be troubled, but also to reach across racial and ethnic and class lines and empower a 31-year-old uneducated Hebrew shepherd and join in a relationship. What the Woodson Center is trying to do is that the answers will not come from either the left or the right. It's going to come from that moral center of people coming. That's why when Paul Levy at this forum asked me, what about blacks and Jews? I said, which Jews and which blacks?
Mm-hmm.
You can't generalize about Jews. You can't generalize about blacks. So we need to come together, uh, Jews and blacks who are value aligned, who share a common understanding that character and morality is central to any process of redemption and renewal. And that's when the Pharaoh and the Joseph, Pharaoh had the resources and the knowledge, Joseph had the testimony and the experience.
Wow.
But right now we're in a class, so the biggest barrier I face isn't racial, it's class. We just won't recognize that untutored does not mean unwise.
Wow. Dr. Woodson, that's a lot to think of. I don't know if you remember this because after I heard you speak in Florida, I did approach you and just mention a quick word about Joseph, something that's fascinated me about his character, because I do find him to be one of those really exceptional characters in Scripture. And I've noticed how Joseph begins his journey with a pretty quick downturn. He goes ahead and has these dreams that the world is centered around him, tells his brothers, and that doesn't go very well for him. He gets thrown into a pit then. Then when he starts, in jail in a different session of his life, a different segment of his life, he starts interpreting the dreams of others, being less self-centered and being able to see the other person and interpret their dreams. That actually becomes eventually 2 years thereafter his get out of jail free card, maybe not so free, but his get out of jail card. And that's when Pharaoh calls upon him. But when Pharaoh calls upon him, he doesn't only interpret the dream, he lays out a business plan. He says, Pharaoh, this is how you're going to make it work. This is how you're going to overcome the famine. And that's when Pharaoh says, wow, I like that plan. You're hired. And so Joseph becomes the person who can make other dreams, the dreams of others come true because he sees beyond himself. And in my mind, I don't know, that seems to connect with the values that you're speaking of.
Absolutely. But the other thing about Joseph, he was arrogant when he said to his father and his brother, I saw you all bow down. It took all those years and disappointments to cleanse him of self-importance.
Mm-hmm.
When he came before Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, I understand you can interpret dreams. He said, no, I can't interpret dreams. I am really God's vessel. Remember that part. I am God's vessel.
I'm a messenger.
I'm the messenger. Because now he was humble. He was contrite. He said, no, God uses me because I've emptied myself of importance. That's important too. Also, he deals with the whole symbolic race thing. When he first saw his brothers, he wept in silence because he was still angry at them. It wasn't until they passed the test, when Judah finally came to Pharaoh and said, it would break my father's heart if Benjamin will take me. That's when Joseph cried and revealed himself, because Judah and his brothers became their brother in spirit. That's why I say to people, you may be my color, but I want to know, are you my kind?
Mm-hmm.
If you're Jewish, I want to know, are you my kind? Not whether are you my ethnicity or my color. I want to know, you and I can have a relationship based upon whether you're my kind.
Those same shared values that you were speaking about at the top of the conversation.
Absolutely. It's and so that's what and this is what I was trying to say to the group in Palm Beach. There's where we ought to be working together. Julius Rosenwald, to me, and what he did with Booker T. Washington offers the model of what we ought to be doing going forward. Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, high school dropout, wealthy man, the first thing he did as a Jew was to support YMCAs for blacks because they were denied housing. And then he worked with Booker T. Washington over the course of 30 years to build 5,000 schools.
Wow. That's amazing.
But there was and Stephanie Deutsch, all of you should read Stephanie Deutsch's book. She's married to the great grandson of Rosenwald.
Mm.
And she has a book called Do You Want to Build a School? This man should be known to he's very popular among blacks in the South. 1/3 of all blacks who were the sons and daughters of slaves went to a Rosenwald Booker T school.
Oh, wow.
1/3. And when he was traveling there with his friends, and after some of the schools were built, they were just mentioning his name as he drove past. And a 9-year-old black girl got out and gave him a bouquet of flowers, and he wept. He said that was the most important moment in his life. And so we believe that kind of Booker T Rosenwald coalition is what we should be reestablishing.
Dr. Woodson, as we close this conversation, and there's so much more to discuss, I feel like a couple of times in this conversation, you noted when other people wept, and that was one of those examples. I'm kind of wondering, I mean, with all of the experience and all the insight, are there times where you find yourself weeping, if not literally, then figuratively? And are those tears of pain, or are they tears of joy?
I've never wept tears of pain. Pain doesn't cause me to weep. I've lost a son. Pain doesn't cause me to weep. But I wept in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when we took the violence-free zone program there to the schools, and it had a dramatic impact. We were at a press conference, and a 16-year-old Spanish high schooler who was a former gang leader, the youth advisor who was her mentor was a really large black guy, ex-gang member from Chicago, who was Andre Robinson, working in the schools. And she said this before the press and the superintendent and the chief of police, and all of us were. She said, I have lost 3 friends to gang deaths while I've been in school. I'm not afraid of going to jail. I'm not afraid of dying. But I'm afraid of disappointing Andre.
Mm. Powerful.
And to this day, she's now a college graduate, volunteering back in the same school.
That is so powerful, Dr. Woodson.
There are hundreds of stories like that when you hear young people who have been at the very brink, who've been through everything, confess about their redemption story, how they have overcome brokenness in their life. It'll warm your heart to meet them. And that's what I'm trying to, I take pharaohs on field visits. Come see what I see.
Mm. Yep. So Dr. Woodson, on that, people who want to learn more, want to connect, what would they do? How would they hear about the Woodson Center? How can they get more information?
You can certainly go online, the woodsonCenter.org,
Mm-hmm.
or 1776unites.com.
Mm-hmm.
We have published 3 publications that challenge 1619 project that denigrates Americans, says all whites are racist and all blacks are victims. We challenge that narrative with a curriculum from K through 12 that's now been downloaded 370,000 times all over 50 states. We also, if you go on our website, look for our animations. We have about 10 animations, 5-minute animations, talking about blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires.
Oh, wow.
And in their story, that has been downloaded now 9 million times on YouTube.
Well, after
So
this conversation, it's going to be 9,000,001.
Well, that's great. Well, it's just been wonderful being able to share, this testimony. But I'm very hopeful and optimistic because there's so much good that can be done if we can come together.
That's powerful, Dr. Woodson. It's powerful, and it's, again, getting back to the basics. I mean, ultimately, that's really what we all want. And, there's all of the I don't know, movements and macro processes or trends that are going on in society and government and finance and all these things that are impacting the policies and the way they trickle down. And fortunately, there are people on the front lines who are doing the kind of work that you and the team at the Woodson Center are doing. And so I think we all, society at large, wants to thank you for this kind of work. What you can, you take this example of it. I love the Joseph example, right? It's an individual who had impact far beyond himself. He and that Pharaoh, we're not talking about the Pharaoh of enslavement. That's a Pharaoh that followed the Pharaoh you're referring to, but that partnership between, centers of power. Exactly. It's the centers of power and the people who could facilitate that, having been through what Joseph had been through. So the individual can impact way beyond himself, and these transformational stories of entire communities. It's just inspirational. So thank you so much for the work that you do, Dr. Woodson.
Well, thank you for inviting me and get a chance to share this, because the quality to make our people effective makes them invisible. So we're delighted that people like you will give us an opportunity to share with people these life-changing experiences.
Thank you so much. Dr. Woodson, thank you. This isn't an easy conversation because it challenges something most of us don't want to question, that helping is always good. But what we heard here is more precise than that. Some help restores, and some help, even with the best intentions, creates dependency or misses the root entirely. And the difference comes down to understanding what kind of problem you're actually dealing with. If this makes you pause or even feel a little bit uncomfortable, that's worth sitting with. And look out for this week's Giving Challenge, where we take that idea and turn it into something you can apply immediately. Thank you, Victoria Hurst, for making these conversations possible. And thank you all. We'll see you next time.